There is a memory you have carried your entire life that never happened. Not a lie you told yourself. Not a fantasy you mistook for reality. Something more precise than either of those things, and far more disturbing. A memory that is real, genuinely, viscerally real, with color and smell, and the particular weight of a childhood afternoon. But that exists for one purpose only, to hide something else. Something your mind decided, in a fraction of a second, in a year you cannot even name, that you were not yet ready to know. Sigmund Freud called these screen memories. And then, decades later, in a document that received almost no attention when it was published and has received almost none since, he admitted that his most vivid childhood memory was one of them. The memory is this: a meadow, somewhere in Moravia, in the summer of his 3rd year, green grass, and in the grass, yellow flowers, dandelions, bright and excessive, the way colors are excessive only in early childhood when the eye has not yet learned to be selective. Freud is there with 2 other children, a boy and a girl, both slightly older. They are picking the flowers. And then, this is the detail that stayed with him, the detail he returned to again and again across 6 decades. The girl has more flowers than he does, and he takes hers. He takes them with a directness that is not quite aggression, but is not quite innocent either. The other boy encourages him. The girl cries. And then there is bread. Thick, dark peasant bread. And it tastes, this is his word, recorded in 1899, delicious, incomparably delicious. He remembered this for 60 years. The yellow flowers, the crying girl, the bread. And then he sat down and analyzed it. What he found underneath it is the thing that should stop you cold. The memory, he concluded, was a construction, not invented. The meadow was real, the summer was real, the children were real. But the arrangement of the details, the emotional weight distributed across specific images, the way the whole scene presented itself as innocent, pastoral, almost painterly, that was the work of the unconscious acting as an editor. Cutting certain footage, emphasizing other footage, producing, in the end, a memory that felt like a childhood afternoon but functioned like a locked door. Behind the yellow flowers and the crying girl, Freud found his mother. Behind the bread, incomparably delicious, he found something he would spend the rest of his career circling without ever fully naming, even to himself. The original comfort, the original loss, the thing that all subsequent hunger is secretly about, and that no subsequent satisfaction can ever quite reach. The screen memory was not hiding something shameful, it was hiding something unbearable. And that distinction between shame and unbearability is one that Freud made carefully, and that has been almost entirely lost in the century since. He published the theory in 1899, 1 year before the interpretation of dreams, in a paper so compressed and so quietly radical that most of his colleagues read it as a footnote to his larger work. They were wrong to do so, because what Freud was arguing in that paper was not merely that some memories are distorted. He was arguing something that, if taken seriously, destabilizes the entire foundation of personal identity as we understand it. He was arguing that the memories we hold most vividly, most certainly, most tenderly, the ones we return to when we need to remember who we are precisely the ones most likely to be performing a function. That the brightness of a memory, its clarity, its emotional immediacy, is not evidence of its authenticity. It is evidence of its utility. The mind does not preserve what is most important. The mind preserves what is most useful for the story it needs to tell about itself. Read that again, slowly. The memories that feel most real are the ones your mind needs you to believe. There is a woman. Freud never names her. She appears only as a case fragment in his 1899 paper, who remembered, with absolute clarity, a scene from her 5th year. She is standing in a garden. Her aunt is there, wearing a particular dress, a blue dress with white trim that the woman could describe in detail 40 years later. There are roses. There is afternoon light. The scene has the quality of a painting, composed still, suffused with a warmth that feels like safety itself. She had returned to this memory throughout her life. In moments of anxiety, in moments of loss, she went back to the garden and the blue dress and the roses and felt for a moment something that resembled peace. When Freud worked with her, what emerged from beneath this luminous scene was not peace at all. The garden was real. The ant was real. But what had happened in that garden, what the blue dress and the roses and the careful afternoon light had been arranged to conceal, was the first time she had understood that her mother was ill. The first time she had understood, in the wordless way that 5-year-olds understand things that adults have tried to hide from them, that something in the world she depended on was not stable. The mind had taken that moment of terror and redecorated it, had kept the garden, removed the terror, added roses, had produced something she could live with, something she could return to, something that would protect her from knowing what she already knew. This is the mechanism Freud was describing, and it is not rare. It is not pathological in the clinical sense. It is, he argued, the standard operating procedure of human memory. We do not remember our lives. We curate them. We are, each of us, the unreliable narrators of our own histories, not because we are dishonest, but because the mind that does the remembering has interests that are not always aligned with the mind that needs to know the truth. The philosophical implications of this are ones that Freud approached, and then, with a characteristic mixture of courage and self-protection, partially retreated from. Because, if screen memories are not the exception but the rule, if the vivid, certain, emotionally resonant memories that constitute the narrative of a self are systematically arranged to conceal, rather than reveal, then the question of who we actually are becomes genuinely, vertiginously open. You are not the story you remember. You are the story your mind decided you could survive. Freud returned to his own meta-memory in 1917 in a set of notes that were not intended for publication. At this point, he had been practicing psychoanalysis for over 2 decades. He had analyzed hundreds of patients. He had developed, tested, revised, and defended a theoretical framework of extraordinary sophistication. And he sat down, alone, with the yellow flowers and the crying girl and the incomparably delicious bread, and he went deeper. What he found in those 1917 notes, which his daughter Anna reviewed before permitting limited access to scholars, and which remain only partially published, was a man confronting the limits of his own method when applied to himself. He could identify the screen. He could name, with reasonable confidence, what the screen was concealing, but the naming did not dissolve it. The memory did not transform. The yellow flowers remained yellow. The bread remained delicious. This is the part of Freud's theory that has been almost entirely ignored because it is the part that is most uncomfortable for the edifice he built. He discovered, in his own analysis, that insight is not the same as liberation, that knowing why your mind constructed the screen does not dismantle the screen, that you can understand the architecture of your own repression with complete intellectual clarity and still live inside it. The map does not free you from the territory. In 2026, we have built technologies of memory that Freud could not have imagined and would, I think, have found both fascinating and horrifying. We photograph everything. We store everything. We have created, in our phones, in our cloud archives, in our social media histories, an external memory system of unprecedented completeness. We can scroll back to any afternoon, any meal, any face, any moment of apparent happiness, and find it preserved in exact color, exact light, exact composition. And yet, the screen memory has not been eliminated by the photograph. It has been industrialized, because we do not photograph everything. We photograph what we want to remember. We select in the moment of taking the image which version of the afternoon will survive. We compose the frame. We choose the angle. We apply, sometimes literally, a filter. And then we look back at these images years later and feel, with genuine conviction, that we are seeing what happened. We are seeing what we decided, In that fraction of a second with the camera raised, we needed to have happened. Freud's screen memory has not been solved by the age of documentation. It has simply been outsourced. The unconscious editor has been given a better tool. There is a detail in Freud's meta-memory that he never fully resolved. The other boy, the one who encouraged him to take the flowers from the girl, was, Freud eventually concluded, a figure of some psychological significance. Not merely a childhood playmate, but a kind of projection, a version of a desire that Freud needed to see as external, as coming from outside himself, in order to act on it without full ownership. The boy told him to take the flowers, so Freud took them, and the boy, in the architecture of the memory, absorbed the agency, left Freud with the flowers and the bread and the innocence of a child who was only doing what he was told. He knew this. He wrote it down. He understood that he had, at age 3, already developed the mechanism of distributing his own desires across other figures in order to remain, in his own internal narrative, something other than what he was. He was 3 years old, and he was already editing, which means the question is not when we begin to construct screen memories. The question is whether we ever stop, whether there is, beneath the accumulated layers of curated recollection, a self that remembers without editing. A version of you that knows the full unredacted history of your own interior life. Freud believed there was. He called it the unconscious, and he spent 50 years developing the tools to access it. But his own 1917 note suggests something he never quite said in public, that the unconscious, when you finally reach it, does not speak in the clear declarative sentences of revelation. It speaks in images, in yellow flowers, in the taste of bread, in the blue dress of an ant, in a garden that smelled of roses and concealed something the 5-year-old mind had already understood and immediately decided to forget. The architecture of repression is not a flaw in human cognition. It is the foundation of human cognition. We are built, from the very beginning, to remember selectively, to preserve what we can live with, to construct, from the raw material of experience, a self that is livable rather than accurate. Freud knew this. He proved it. He wrote it down in a paper that almost no one read. And then he went home to Burgas 19, poured himself a glass of something, and lit a cigar, and sat in the lamplight, with 60 years of carefully curated memories, and was, by all accounts, a man who believed he knew himself very well. What is the most vivid memory of your childhood? Hold it for a moment. Feel its clarity, its color, its emotional weight. Now ask yourself, what is it hiding? And ask yourself whether you actually want to know.